Hey folks, good afternoon. This is Matt Kleopfer from Harmony Hill Farmstead, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Sabine Hazan from California with us today. Dr. Hazan, how are you doing today?
Been great, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So my listeners, this is our first time with Dr. Hazan. I'm going to read a quick bio so that you can get a feel for just how much this lady has accomplished in her field. As a specialist in gastroenterology, internal medicine, and hepatology, Dr. Hazan has used her medical expertise in many regards over the last 2 decades as the founder and CEO of Progenibiome, a genetic sequencing research laboratory. She leads 35 plus studies investigating the role of the gut flora in various diseases. She's also the CEO of Ventura Clinical Trials, where she has 20 plus years experience leading clinical trials for cutting edge research on various medical issues. And since March 2020, she's been at the forefront of COVID-19 research, leading ongoing FDA-approved clinical trials for treatment and prophylaxis. Through her study exploring the role of gut flora in COVID-19, Progenibiome became the first lab worldwide to detect SARS-CoV-2 from patient fecal samples by whole genome sequencing. With these findings and extensive knowledge on the microbiome and disease, Dr. Hazan and her partner at Topelia Therapeutics, Dr. Thomas Brody, developed what she feels is the best first line of defense against COVID-19, a combination of natural vitamins and biome boosters, which you can find at biomeboosters.com. Proceeds go to support her research at the Microbiome Research Foundation. Dr. Hazan and Dr. Brody also co-authored this awesome book I have with me right here called Let's Talk Shit, a very humorous and easy to digest explanation of gastrointestinal disorders, treatments, and the next generation hope for gut-related diseases, and proceeds support research via Micro Research Foundation as well. Now here's the coolest part. As the first woman ever accepted into the University of Florida as a clinical gastroenterology fellow, Dr. Sabine Hazan is a pioneer in the medical field. She's published articles in numerous prestigious medical journals and is a series editor on the microbiome for Practical Gastroenterology. As a peer-reviewed journal, she reaches 18,000 gastroenterologists. She's also a speaker for the World Congress of Digestive Disease, MAGI, Microbiome Congress, International Drug Discovery Science and Technology Conference, and NIST. That is incredible.
It's a long paragraph. I should really shorten my life.
You know what? It needed.
I think it should just be Dr. Hazan deals with SHIT, and then from A to Z, you know?
From A to Z. Well, we got that out of the way. Let's dive right in with the largest amount of your research that goes into autism and the microbiome. What environmental / epigenetic factors can you talk about that have led us where we went from 1 in 10,000 with autism to where we are today to roughly 1 in 40?
It's disturbing. That's the perfect term for it. You know, I don't know. That's why I went into this. I want to understand what happened, and I'm going to go back to 1980 because I was born then. And I had the hopes of being a doctor to understand life. And in 1980, the rate of autism was 1 in 2,000. Now it's 1 in 40. I mean, and in some circles, some people think, well, there's a spectrum disorder that may be even 1 in 20. So what is going on that, you know, has gone from 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 40 or 1 in 20? And my biggest concern is, what is it going to be in 20 years? Is it going to be 1 in 1? And if we don't pay attention and we don't look into what's the cause, how do we fix this problem? The future is very, very, dark. That's the best way to put it. And I think the future is dark already with COVID-19. Now you add on top of that problems and you start looking. And in my opinion, really, it's the effects of globalization. That's the best way that I can kind of look at it, because when you look at globalization, with globalization comes globesity, right? I mean, islands in the Pacific have an obese problem when they used to be eating fish and vegetables and farming, and now they started importing all their foods from America and all the pardon my fun, garbage foods, right? And then all of a
Right.
sudden they started increasing their weight, chips and Coke and sugar drinks and all that sugar, is just enormous. So I think with globalization comes globesity, but it's not only with globesity, it's also, and by the way, that's a term, I became aware of globesity because of the work of a scientist at USC when my daughter was doing some research on globesity and Kiribati. And it kind of like I started connecting the dots. I said, why is the population in Kiribati dying at 50 from complications of obesity? These people are supposed to be healthy and vegetarian and eating what they're farming. So that was the first look. Then you look at Australia, New Zealand areas. I remember going to Australia 20 years ago, and you would go to a gas station and the food you would get is like a grilled fish, and it was just so amazing. You get and I'm like, this is the perfect country, right? Vegetables and fish. And now you go to Australia and it's like, hamburgers and just junk food that we, processed foods and all these foods fast foods we've gotten from, the American diet, the globalization of diet, right? And so with globalization, globesity, but also autism, right? Autism is going, super high around the world. When you talk to physicians in India and you see that they have an autism problem, you go, what's going on, right? And so autism is increasing, but it's not only autism, it's Parkinson's, it's cancer, it's Alzheimer's, it's, heart disease, it's everything you don't see in Central Africa or in the Amazon jungles, right? Mm-hmm. So what is different and you're right, I mean, I am a connector of dots. What is different in the Amazon jungles and in Central Africa that America, Australia, India, and all that has a difference, right? And the difference is really in the microbiome. And so I think that's my interest. That's why I dove in. I was very privileged because I had a couple families with triplets and twins with autism when I started looking into the microbiome. And I started noticing similarities between the mom and the child, where the mom could have given a lot more to the kid that is autistic of the bad bacteria than to the other kids. And so I published, one of my first papers was basically the dysbiosis of an autistic child in triplets, showing that actually there is a gut dysbiosis problem there. Now, I'm not sure that, gut dysbiosis explains everything. There's probably a component of, encephalopathy as a primary versus, just gut problem versus the connection, right, between the gut and the brain, right, could be broken. So I think, we need to start looking at the gut, first, especially when you look at the data from Dr. Adams that showed 50% improvement of neurological symptoms in these kids with autism. So that kind of sets you off and says, well, 50% of these kids have a microbiome problem, right? Let's look at it. Maybe if we do fecal transplant, these kids will start improving. So I set myself on a path, got approved the first IND. So I own a research center, as you said, that basically puts, clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies, good products. I always say I'm the vigilante. If good products are good, they go out. If they're not good, they stay out, right?
Pretty awesome.
And essentially that's why I stay in the trenches of research, because somebody needs to be the vigilante. Somebody needs to say, wait a minute, this drug is causing my patients to spit up blood. That's not okay. And then make that phone call to the FDA and say, that drug is causing, people to spit up blood. So I think, my family, we're all doctors, 9 doctors in the family. We're all by the book. We're all like sticklers. We don't want to hear criticisms from each other. So, we, especially my husband, he worked for the DA as a cardiologist. And so he will always kind of say, well, how do you know? Don't say for sure. Don't say this. And he'll always challenge me to be better. And so are my colleagues. So I think, we need to question what's going on with autism. And so the best answer is, I don't know yet, but I am going to know because I'm doing the work and the research. And we need to know, because my worst fear, I feel for all these moms, and I fear that I'm very privileged that I have two girls that are not on the spectrum, because I see these moms, it's a full-time job, they're heroes. And I feel for them, and I feel like, well, what if in 20 years from now, my grandchild is autistic, and I could have done something about it in my lifetime, right? When I had energy. And so I think we all have to pay attention, and that's my mission.
Yeah, what we as people, we know we can agree on is that the part of autism that isn't what we thought it was is what these genetic factors is. There's nothing we can do about it. We caused this problem, and we got to figure out what we did in the environment to fix it. So the parents that are taking on these challenges, I've read a lot of research, because this, as a former school teacher, this was a very emotional topic in teachers' meetings, where we would have students with special needs. We had kids with ADD, ADHD, a lot of emotional trauma, really hard time concentrating in the classroom. That was really what led me to change my profession to be a farmer, because I knew food played a huge role in this conversation. What types of things are parents that are choosing to take control of their, we're going to use autism, autistic children's health? What types of changes are they able to notice when they change the diet of the child?
I think I've seen a lot of different parents and a lot of different kids, and everybody definitely has their own methods. Some parents are very, have tried the antifungals, the antibacterials, some parents have tried the fecal transplant. Some parents have tried, working with occupational therapy and speech therapies and all that. I think, it's a multidisciplinary approach. And I think there's not a one, I don't think like it's a pill, and therefore you give a pill or you do fecal transplant and you're going to fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think you really have to look and dive into, all these aspects that can help. And I think there's a huge support system within the autism community that parents step in and say, well, look, this helped me and this helped me. And I think parents have learned how to talk to each other. So definitely diet, some parents are noticing. One thing I'm noticing is a lot of these kids have GI problems, which I don't think we were so, aware of as GI doctors, because we don't really see them for GI problems, because nobody really pays attention to that kid, because you can't really ask the question, well, how's your pain? Where's your pain? How are your bowel movements? So you really have to have a parent that is very astute in noticing the symptoms of their kid. And when you dig in and you ask those questions, you start realizing, wow, a lot of them have a problem with GI. And in fact, when you look at the data from Dr. Walker and Dr. Krigsman, you see there's a component of, microscopic colitis in these kids. And, if you follow the work of Dr. Arthur Krigsman, he treated these kids with, like Crohn's disease, right? And one wonders if maybe this is not a extra intestinal manifestation of Crohn's disease, right? Because certainly we have seen Crohn's disease, extra intestinal manifestations. Patients have these rash, they have joint problem, the liver problems. It's multi-system, right? Crohn's disease is not just the gut. Yes, it starts in the gut, anywhere from the mouth all the way to the rectum. You could have ulcers, patchy areas, but the reality is it doesn't just hit the gut. It starts in the gut and then moves on to other systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so one wonders if maybe autism is not part of that spectrum of Crohn's disease and inflammatory bowel disease. And if it is, then we have to look at it. Why is a GI doctor involved in autism and fecal transplant? Because if it is in the gut, and we've seen how we did with Crohn's disease. Remember, Crohn's disease was the beginning in pharma that opened the eyes to doctors about monoclonal antibodies, right? Humira, Remicade, those came from trying to fix Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis first. But then what happened is they realized, hey, wait a minute, it fixes arthritis, it fixes psoriasis, it fixes Alzheimer's, let's do clinical trials. And then you started seeing these biologics, right, that started going around to making the path for different treatment for different diseases. So it all starts, in my opinion, in the gut. Why am I interested in this? Well, like Dr. Barodi, I've had success with fecal transplant. I had a couple patients that had C. diff, Clostridium difficile, that you catch from antibiotics. And I realized that when I did fecal transplant, it actually improved their Crohn's disease. So that was the first thing for me that said, wait a minute, something's going on with Crohn's when I do fecal transplant. What is going on? And I'm not the kind of person that pushes fecal transplant for this, that, and every disease. But I am the person that wants to ask the question, what is happening? And that's why Progenobiome was really invented or created, was to ask the question, what is happening when you obtain a cure, right? Because you cannot compare, you and I cannot be compared, right? We eat completely different. You're in Kansas, I'm in California, completely different diets, right? Completely different exposures to all sorts of different things environmentally. And so our microbiome is very different. Also, on top of that, I was born in North Africa. I traveled to India, China, Japan. My microbiome is very, very different than yours. So if we had the same disease, there is no way we could be compared to each other because we came from different environments, right? But what you can compare, and that's what I brought up at a meeting when I spoke at the Microbiome Congress in front of the FDA, NIH, and IST, you can compare when you reach a cure. When you reach a cure on the same person, you have an insight of what goes on in the microbiome. You have an idea that says, well, you know what, this was, especially if you have an accredited lab, which we are, we're CAP and CLIA certified, especially if you have validated assays. In other words, if I tell you you have Clostridium difficile, that means I took Clostridium difficile that was cultured in a lab and I pushed it through my pipeline and it was actually Clostridium difficile. So it's not like it just came out of the blue and I just followed the pipeline that says Clostridium difficile. I compared it to the real bacteria of Clostridium difficile. So that's what we call a validated assay, right? And then it has to reproduce, right? So in other words, I use a different technician and I tell him to use my same pipeline. He has to give me the same results that another technician gave me, right? So if two technicians can agree that they did 20 samples and they have exactly the same result, plus or minus a standard deviation, obviously, then we can agree that the assay is valid, right? If the assay is valid, verified, and reproduced, then you can bet that whatever data you're going to get after from the cure from whatever you've attained an improvement is going to show you what changed. And really that was my path. So it was fascinating because I had those stool samples of Crohn's disease before and after I improved the patients. And I saw, it was an amazing, it's like, Newton's apple falling on your head and saying, wow, there is like, there is gravity, my God, and the forces of gravity, etc. So it was the same thing for me. It's like, wow, this much bacteria existed in that patient with Crohn's. And then after I changed and did what I did, it disappeared and his symptoms improved. And then you can publish that, right? You can go to the peer review and you can publish that to the journals, and then they look at it over and over and they say, yeah, you know what? She's right, because it's concrete, right? Same thing with COVID. If COVID exists in the stools, which I showed, and then it disappears with a treatment, there's no way to challenge that, right? It's like black and white, right? If I have a skin lesion, I remove it and it's no longer there, that's it, it's over. So that's basically, in essence what I'm after, the truth.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people today they're starting to become switched on now that we've made the gut-brain connection. Many people are told by their family practice doctors, probiotics and prebiotics and these various other, staple foods. People like associate things like apple cider vinegar and your sauerkraut as trying to find the beginnings of gut health. What types of things would you recommend for somebody that, has taken on the idea of taking a probiotic? They want to help fix their gut. Walk me through sort of a protocol, what types of things do they need to watch out for in their own diets? And then as far as acquiring a good probiotic, what types of misinformation is out there about this?
So I think the whole nutrition, gut, microbiome has become a business, sadly. Yep. And I think the whole probiotic has become a business. I think it's a $64 billion business. Wow. So with a $64 billion business, you can't possibly have, oversight, right? because everybody comes out with the probiotics, and in the nutritional side, it's very difficult to come up with something and say, okay, well, we need oversight. Personally, I know people don't like the FDA, but I personally think there needs to be more oversight on all those, right? When the FDA started looking into why were people getting more Clostridium difficile, right? And then they started looking into the meat. I mean, you're in the farming industry, right? And they started saying, wow, there's a lot of antibiotics given to meat. Could it be that we're eating that hamburger that is full of antibiotics, putting those antibiotics somehow in our guts and killing off our good bacteria? And maybe that's why we get C. diff, right? So if you remember.
You mean that after those antibiotics are given to the animal and we consume that, those antibiotics are not dead, they're still active?
Yes, they're still active. They're in your animal.
Now,
they're in your chicken.
Huge.
There's enough studies on that, by the way. Enough studies that show that, yes. So, why do I know that on a personal level is because I treat a lot of patients with Clostridium difficile. C. diff has been my bug, okay? I mean, 25 years ago, I tried to kill it with antibiotics, and then I did clinical trials for trying to kill it, monoclonal antibodies, fidaxomicin, all sorts of antibiotics, clinical trials, to fecal transplant, to the fecal material in a capsule. So I've tried to kill that bug more ways than one with probably over 20 clinical trials. I was known in the world of clinical trials as the queen of C. diff. So C. diff is my bug. I only started understanding it when I own a genetic sequencing lab. And when I realized, wait a minute, I have C. diff in my gut. Well, of course I have C. diff. I'm exposed to everybody, right? And I'm treating these patients. Probably I got it by exposures, right? And then you start looking at the data and you start realizing, wait a minute, C. diff is 10 million years old. And then I started looking at my patients. So the first 17 patients we did, we found C. diff in all of them. And I said, well, probably serendipity, right? And then 119 patients, we found C. diff in all of them. Now, non-toxigenic C. diff, okay? The good guy C. diff. We found it in everyone, except for 2 patients that were on chronic antibiotics, okay? So then we're up to 800 patients. We're still finding C. diff. So what does it tell you? C. diff is part of our microbiome. It's part of our signature microbiome. But what happened is, what I realized when I did fecal transplant is that when I restore a whole microbiome, so patients with C. diff have a microbiome that is desolate, okay? C. diff toxin. In other words, C. diff that creates the symptoms of diarrhea, etc. So I'm going to be slow on that because I know I tend to speak fast and a lot of people can't keep up with what I say. But Clostridium difficile is a bacteria you get from taking antibiotics, right? Why? Because if it's in your gut, okay, and you're taking antibiotics, you're killing the balance of your gut, right? So now you're killed all the good bacteria that allowed that whole microbiome to stay unified and together, right? So you have an imbalance and you have an overgrowth of the C. diff that is the one that secretes the toxin, right? So now C. diff takes over the gut and starts secreting its toxin to kill the host, right? That's the process, right? So all of it in the gut microbiome is balances. So if you're eating a food that has antibiotics, you're essentially getting those antibiotics in your system. If you're on top of that taking an antibiotic for an ear infection, you're adding more damages to your gut microbiome and you're killing it. Now, obviously, we have a baseline of these bacteria that basically regrow even after we kill it with antibiotics. So in a month, 2 months, 3 months, you restore all that, right? And that was the whole push of probiotics, and Activa yogurt at the beginning, I remember, was the big one is, if you're taking antibiotics, take an Activa yogurt, bam, your bloating that you're having after taking the antibiotics is much better. And therefore you knew that you were kind of rebalancing your gut, right? Mm-hmm. So your gut tells you if you're eating something. I think the big mistake, to go back to your question, the big mistake people make is if you're healthy, you're having a good solid bowel movement, you're doing great, you're happy, you're eating well, you're not having heartburn, you're not having any GI problems, don't do anything. You're doing great. If, however, and don't be branded by the media that tells you, oh, you need to be healthy, you need to eat coleslaw, and you need to eat this and that, because you're healthy. Clearly, you're in balance. If you're not healthy, that's a different scenario, right? Because that tells you my gut is out of balance. And therefore, if my gut is out of balance, I need to restore the good stuff. I'm missing something. So I need to play with my nutrition. I'll always remember in GI, a guy that came to me, he heard that if he ate whole wheat bread and full of seeds, you know, those multi-grain breads, that was the way to health, right? And he came to me, bloated, abdominal pain, and it just started with the consumption of bread. And I basically looked at his small bowel, and lo and behold, he had celiac fruit, gluten intolerance, right?
Yep.
And I said to him, well, you can't eat bread anymore because clearly something happened here, right? So here's a guy that was doing perfectly fine. And then all of a sudden, something changed. His whole diet changed. He started obsessing on, you know, multi-grain breads and caused himself damages. So, you know, anything that you overdo, you're creating an imbalance, right? If you drink too much coffee, it's not good for you, right? You're going to start having heartburn, right? And if you drink 1 cup, it's okay. If you drink if you drink 1 glass of wine, great. But if you drink the whole bottle every night, well, that's a problem, right? Yeah. You're going to start the domino effect. So everything, I'm a big believer of everything in moderation. And if you're healthy, do nothing, you're fine, right? I mean, if you're healthy and you're overweight and you're not liking, well, then change your diet accordingly, right? To lose the weight and exercise and do all that. But if you're healthy and you have no symptoms, don't mess with that.
Awesome. Now I want to back up a little bit. When we were talking about the antibiotics that go through the animal and then end up in us, you know, one of the things that I really was curious about when I heard the research of Dr. Don Huber, who has done a lot of research overseas. He's worked with China, and he was curious about, when he was working with China, he noticed that the Chinese government refused to feed any food products that use genetically modified grain to the Chinese military. And when he took that 18 carbon bond structure and put it under the microscope, he started to notice that back in the 1960s, I believe it was 64, when Jim Chang first patented this molecule, he noticed that not only could this molecule chelate every mineral on the periodic table, but it was also an antibiotic. Now, we spray billions of tons of this chemical all over farmland, all over the world, not just the United States. And when the animal is ingesting this chemical that is on the grain, you know, and it is an antibiotic, and now the microbiome of the animal is disrupted. And because we're harvesting the animal so quickly today, I don't know that the animal necessarily has time to sort of develop the symptoms of, you know, chronic GI stuff. And now that we're I think the mid 90s was when a lot of GM crops hit the market. Right. So we're hitting the second generation, and now we're noticing, you know, symptoms of chronic disease where it started out in grandpa and grandma, and then it was in mom and dad, and now we're seeing it in middle schools and high schools. We're seeing, you know, diabetes, if you will, in the high school. Right. That's what's alarming.
And that's upsetting too, because with the media portraying all these beautiful girls that are photoshopped, and then these kids have a problem with, you know, obesity and diabetes and everything, you know, their mental status gets affected, especially in a world of Instagram and photos and, you know, you're beautiful and you're showing your, you know, all that. So I think all that is disrupting our future and the future of our children, in my opinion.
Now I'm going to switch gears for a little bit. Yes. In farming in the 1960s, antibiotics became a huge part of what we did in animal agriculture. We started to slowly confine the animal out of its natural environment into smaller and smaller spaces. And when the way this animal reacted to that, we had to do more and more to try to push this animal along to get it to production weight. And we started to use antibiotics a lot. And then we started to figure out that an animal would take on more weight if it had, you know, things like erythromycin or various other antibiotics in its feed ration. What are we noticing now in humans where, you know, the links between antibiotic use and depression?
Well, I think when you look at antibiotic use, what is the antibiotic doing, and what is an antibiotic to begin with, right? I mean, an antibiotic is just a bug, right? It's a fungus of a potato. If you look back at the history and you read my book, you'll see the story and how they discovered penicillin to begin with. So I think you have to understand that it's microbes, right? So what is vancomycin? Vancomycin is another bug, right? And here we use it for Clostridium difficile. What is ivermectin? It's a bacteria in the soil of Japan, right? So what are all these meds, right? You have to understand. And that's why I'm a big believer in transparency in pharmacology, because I think people need to understand what is an antibiotic, what is a vaccine, what is an old vaccine versus a new vaccine, what is the technology we're using to create these molecules, etc. So I think, when you look at people that take antibiotics, I think there's a consensus that you are killing, because you are creating that imbalance of giving a bunch of bugs, right, which is what an antibiotic is, to kill off your own microbes. What is your stools, and sorry to be graphic, but what is that? That's just trillions of bugs. So if you bring in, one bug that you're taking on every day for 14 days, you're disrupting your balance, right? And with that, at that moment where there's a disruption, you're allowing for viruses all around us to penetrate, right? And then the virus penetrates and then decreases your immunity, because your gut is your immunity. And then that immunity is decreased, goes to the nerve, goes to the brain-gut axis, and that's where the whole depression. You see, when you talk to people that are constipated, they have that constipated personality, right? They're miserable. They're depressed. But then you talk to people that are like, it's kind of like a balloon full of air, it's just like bloated, etc. So same thing with a constipated person. They're miserable. So when they evacuate and they have a good bowel movement, they're happy. They're just, they're not miserable anymore. You talk to people that are in nursing homes, their number one complaint is, bloating and constipation. I think as people age, the number one complaint is constipation, and people become obsessed with their bowel movements, And I think it's intuitively, they know that there's something going on in there that they need to evacuate. There's days that people come into my office and they tell me, I feel like I have toxins in my gut. I need to evacuate. And, at the beginning, I was like, what are they talking about? Toxins, right? But then you start looking into this field and you start looking at the dysbiosis, which is really imbalance of the gut microbiome. And you understand what is going on with these patients. So it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But we're at the beginning. So, all this is hypothetical. I'm a scientist, and I always say, listen, Albert Einstein used to say a beautiful quote. If we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research. And right. That's what it is. All of it is research, right? So we have to do the research. We have to ask the questions. Any doctor, scientist that is outside the norm of thought is really the person you should follow, because that person is the innovator. That person is looking outside to see what is going on. I'm the doctor that's always been kind of rebellious in a way, because if
and I'm the farmer that's always been a little rebellious. So
well, there you go. That's why we're together. So if everybody was going right, I'm gonna go left, right? Because I want the shortcut. If everybody's going up the mountain, I'm not gonna follow and wait in line. I'm gonna find the shortcut around, right? Because you have to innovate to get there, right? So
it could be the most important thing you said today.
Well, but it's true. I think we're breaking that innovation, right? Those people that are innovators, we are blocking them by saying, oh, no, wait, you need to come back. I mean, you're a teacher, right? Yep. A student that is outside and coming out with a weird article or process, you pay attention to that, because you're like, wow, you know what? I didn't think about that. Yeah. That's innovation. Yeah. That's the A student for me, right? The students that are like just copying, well, they're just a bunch of copycats. Yeah. Who wants that, right? Anybody can copy. So anyways, that's me.
I want to sort of back you up on a story a little bit. When I first started farming and raising my own food and really becoming concerned about exactly the process, because you and I are both totally invested in the process, not so much the products, but the how and the why are we doing things a certain way. I remember when I first got chickens and I rotationally grazed my animals across the landscape. And I got some cows. They were from the sale barn. They came out of a commercial confinement operation. They were completely sterile. They'd been, loaded with various amounts of who knows what. And I saw a guy, he had his chickens, and what he did, instead of using a parasiticide to keep the flies off the cows, he used chickens.
Right.
And so I had these chickens following these cows across the pasture, and these chickens would not pick through the manure like they would. Normally the flies would eat it, and they would pick through it and eat the flies out of the poop. And they wouldn't do it. Like, they would not touch this poop.
Yeah.
And then we got a dairy cow from a friend who had never had medicine in its life. And all of a sudden, these chickens, as soon as a manure pat hit the ground, they flocked to it.
Wow.
Crazy. So what we what we started to figure out was that these animals, like their poop, something was different in it, that the biology, the insects that did not want to continue the larva cycle, the chickens could tell the difference in the poop and quit using it. We got all those animals off of our farm because their manure pats would just lay out there and go untouched. Chickens wouldn't do anything with them. What was going on in like when those chickens are looking at that and they can see that biology doesn't want anything to do with this fecal matter on the landscape? Is this because of a monospeciation, or basically sterile poop, if you will? Is that why?
I think so. I think listen, it's like you as a farmer, you plant your strawberries and you don't put anything on them, and you work with the environment to kind of make sure they're these beautiful strawberries, and they taste like strawberries, right? And you want to eat them because you know what a fresh strawberry tastes like, or a fresh tomato. You go to the market and these big grocery stores, these strawberries don't taste like anything. They taste like rubber, right? And same with the tomatoes. It doesn't taste like anything. So you as a human being know what you're being fed just by tasting it. So I think, on a primitive level, the chickens know, and they're probably more astute to know that, hey, I'm not touching that, right? So I know now. I know, like, I'm so aware of the foods that are coming from a local farm and the taste, and who's using pesticide and who's not. Because let me tell you, there's so many farms that are telling you they're organic, and I take care of a lot of farmers. They're one of my favorite patients to take care of, because they always bring me fresh vegetables. That's how we pay.
Yeah.
These are my favorite, by the way, because it's like, okay, I'll exchange the eggs for consults. Perfect, works for me. So my favorite day is when I get vegetables, a bottle of wine from, like, all made in the, wineries, etc. So anyway, so these people come and, you can see the freshness of those vegetables, and some of the farmers that are working in these industrial farms, we'll call it that are basically massive production, will tell you, they'll say, yeah, well, we spray, it's organic, but we spray at 4:00 in the morning, so nobody knows, right? So I think, people need to know their farmers, know where they're getting the foods. You need to be more astute to the taste, etc. So and what we put in our body is extremely, crucial. And, that's what I want to see. I want to see, if something is supposedly good for you, you individually, is it good for you? Is it good for your microbiome? So when someone says, well, coleslaw is amazing. Okay, well, where's the study that showed that like 20 people took coleslaw and 20 people didn't, and that it was good for you, right? Maybe good for you because your family ate it and that was good. It's your comfort food, right? But it may not be for someone else. And I'm a big believer of, so one of the big things that I want to say on this, and that's my big mission really, what I noticed in the microbiome is very simple. You have diversity of microbes, trillions of bacteria all cohabitating together, doing their jobs. And that is health, right? Yep. When you lose the diversity, you remove the clostridiums, you remove the bifidobacters, you remove the lactobacillus, that group of bacteria, you lose health, you get disease. And in fact, what we're showing up, we're writing the dictionary of all these microbes and diseases. It's probably going to take like 5 to 10 years, but we're writing it. We started 42 clinical trials on the microbiome and disease. We're hoping to get like 1,000 patients per disease so that we could say with certainty, this is the formula for Parkinson's, this is the formula for diabetes, this is the formula for Alzheimer's. This is a long project. This is like writing the dictionary. You know, I want doctors on my side. I want scientists. That's why I created the Malibu Microbiome meeting, to bring people to the meeting, created the Biome Squad, to bring people to kind of look at it, right? Because it's not a one-woman job, it's multiple people. And so my goal is to write the formula. There is a formula we're seeing right now with Alzheimer's, autism, in some patients, not in everyone, but in some patients, there is a formula. I want to understand that formula, because that formula tells you when you have an imbalance, you have that disease. So we're seeing across the land, across the path, the diseases, we're seeing an imbalance. Now, when you look at the microbiome and you lose the diversity, okay, so remember, you only leave one group of bacteria, you have disease. Now, imagine if you extrapolate that to humanity, right? You lose a diversity of humanity. You globalize humanity, right? You make everybody the same microbiome, the same gut, the same microbes. You're going to lose humanity. It's the same principle. And I think that's what scares me. That's what wakes me up, you know, early in the morning, late at night, sleeping. That's why I became a hurricane, because I feel that, you know, microbes define us. Microbes in our gut makes us happy. Microbes in our gut makes us unhappy. Those microbes need to be understood. Those microbes need to be in balance. And also humanity needs to be in balance. The idea that, you know, everybody, think about it. We're all, you know, we're all uproar when we hear about a certain race being discriminated or gender or whatever. But when you look at all of humanity as one, the beauty is in the diversity. The beauty is in the gender. The beauty is in, you know, how you think, how you're different. That's the beauty. If everybody wears black, well, that's really an ugly world, right? Yeah. But if everybody wears, you know, white and multicolor, the world is not in black and white. The world is in color. And we need to appreciate the colors. We need to stop, you know, hating, start loving, bringing on that unity. I think if anything for COVID, for me, it's a virus that penetrated and put humanity at its knees for one purpose, in my opinion, to bring humanity together, to say, hey, guess what? An invisible 0.015 nanometer virus, and I'm not sure the size anymore, but that small invisible virus is killing people. That means the microbiome, the microbes are in charge. We need to respect the microbes. We need to respect the balance. We need to respect the planet. So that's what it all comes down to. You and I have a love for farming because we appreciate that when you see a fruit grow on a tree, you did that, but also the planet did that. And the planet did that and the planet gives you what you need. Think about it. The planet gives you vitamin D from the sun, gives you vitamin C from the trees, gives you all these fungus that give us these, you know, antibacterial, antibiotics. So the planet gives us everything, these herbs, these cumin, these anti-inflammatory spices. It's all from the planet. So we need to respect the balance of the planet. And when you see a catastrophe occurring in a planet, in an area, it's because there is an imbalance. And we need to respect that. So that's what and it's not political. It's not, you know, humanity needs to come together as one. And that's my opinion.
Yeah, as a musician and a farmer, I have this incredibly diverse melting pot of friends and acquaintances. And since we've been using the word diversity so much, I mean, my passion in farming is to try to mimic the most productive food production system in creation. And I mean, I love science, but I'm into science for, you know, the sole purpose of observing and to know how and what is going on with the earth in nature, and to not go in and go, well, it needs change, it's broken, we need to modify it and fix it, or make it more productive, or we pour this magic chemical on it and everything's fixed.
Right.
And I think that those are the line down the middle of, well, what side of science are you on? Are you there to try and restore a natural ecosystem in the gut or in your pasture, or
100%.
table? Yeah. Or in your lab, or whatever it may be. Or are you under the assumption that, for profit, it's broken, and I have this magic tincture here that's going to fix everything? Because farmers have been drugged down this road for multiple decades of, if you pour this magic stuff on your land, everything's going to be better. And the problem is it's not sustainable, and it's happened to the farms, and it's happened to our bodies. And now people are finally waking up and going, oh man.
Right. Back to basics, back to nature.
Yeah.
Back to understanding. Fecal transplant really is farming, right? Because what are we doing? We do fecal transplant. We kill off all the bacteria. It's like we remove all the weeds, and we start turning the earth. So we clean the biofilm in the colon by going in there and washing everything. And then essentially we start putting new microbes into the colon to implant. And we make sure that the bowels are steady to implant. It's the same thing. You plant your seeds and you wait. Now, if there's a tornado and you didn't plant your seeds very deep, the seeds are going to go and your garden is gone, right?
Yeah.
Or if you've got a, whatever, hurricane. So I think it's all gardening. It's all, we have to learn. Our bowels is a compost, right? What is a compost, right? It's bacteria and greens mixed together to give you that beautiful earth that you need to regrow, right? So that's what our colon is. We have these bacteria in our guts, and we're basically eating vegetables and fruits to feed the bacteria. So, I mean, on a beautiful way to put it, that's it.
Folks, I know I'm not showing it very well, but my excitement of the words and the rhetoric that Dr. Hazan is laying down here, I have so many friends I wish you could meet someday, because they're so switched on to exactly what you're trying to say and put across here. Before we finish up, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to switch gears to COVID-19, because as we spoke earlier, this is something that literally brought us to our knees. It is a fear. People have real fears about what this disease is doing to them and to their health. I want to give my own sort of testimony with what our family dealt with COVID-19, and then kind of have you talk about why this happened the way it did.
Sure.
I have never worn a mask, not one time. I haven't taken the vaccine. Okay. I do get a little bit of exercise every day. I try to eat really healthy. I do cold water therapy. I do breathing exercises. I am a robust ecosystem. And my wife was introduced to COVID at the beginning of February. She was down for about 2 days. She had a headache, a neck ache, and she had a fever, a mild one. It lasted about 18 hours. Our children got it. And because I didn't want to get locked down for 24 straight days, I decided that I needed to catch this virus. And for as communicable as it was said to be, I knew this wouldn't be a problem. I held her right in front of my face. I made her cough right in my face.
Oh my God, you're like the king. You're like
down and hold it in there, thinking, oh, I got this virus right where I want it. I even made her stick out her tongue, and I wiped her spit and put it.
Wow.
Now that's as far as I even kissed her a couple times, just thinking, man, it's gotta be something. And I waited a couple days thinking, yeah, got it. And
it didn't come.
Nothing ever happened. I took the PCR test or something like that. Afterwards, it was like 14 days after I made her cough in my face. I didn't have antibodies. I never tested positive for it. Am I just so worthless a virus doesn't even want anything to do with me? Or why did this thing not take root? What was it about my ecosystem that didn't even give this virus a chance?
Okay, so let me ask you, you're gardening, right? So you're
gardening.
You play with poop of animals, right?
I do.
All that, okay.
Not intentionally, but yeah.
Yeah, but you do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you eat pretty much diversified diet is my guess, right?
Absolutely.
So whatever you feel, you eat, and you look very healthy. And you are healthy, right? Okay. So you are the perfect example, by the way, of what I believe is the perfect microbiome of diversity. Which, by the way, everybody that meets me, I always ask for their stool specimens. So Matt, I'm going to analyze your stools for free
All
because I
right.
want to see your microbiome, because
I'm excited to know.
those are the microbiomes that I get so excited about, because I go, wow, this is like, there's a cure in you that you don't even know about, right? So you're the perfect example of what my research is all about. My research is, first of all, I disagree with the placebo-controlled trials for one reason and one reason only. People like you could go into intensive care. You have a signature microbiome, which we're going to be showing and I'm writing about. You have a signature microbiome that you can walk into an intensive care unit and you are not going to catch COVID, much like you did the experiment with your wife, who you kissed, etc. Now, if you got COVID, for example, or if I give you a treatment, a prophylaxis treatment, well, it's not fair to, and the treatment is a sugar pill, but then I give the placebo to a person that is not so good microbiome, right? That person's going to catch COVID because I gave him the sugar pill, but you got a sugar pill, but you're not going to catch COVID because you have a super microbiome, right?
Right.
And so in a way, to me, the whole placebo-controlled trials is flawed because we don't have the base, which is, what does your microbiome look like? You cannot do a study and expect to do, especially in a virus, I'm looking at immunity, and expect to monitor the success of a drug or a prophylaxis or a vaccine or a pill, anything, unless you know the base and the foundation of what that person's microbiome looks like. So when I started doing clinical trials on COVID and I submitted to the FDA, my interest was not in, yes, is the treatment working? I mean, there's 1,000 doctors that have said treatments have worked for XYZ, from steroids to colchicine to, Eliquis to hydroxy to ivermectin. We get bombarded with, the cure for COVID and the cure for COVID, right? And I think a lot of marketing out there. And I think patients are just, confused. And these trials are done with a placebo group and a controlled group, but you can't really measure them. So my interest when I do treatment of patients is really to look at the microbiome before and after, to say, well, it makes sense. The guy that had a diverse microbiome full of XYZ, the microbes I discovered that are, super strong microbes, versus a guy that doesn't have these microbes, is going to do better because he starts off with, a superior microbiome. Thus the idea of health, right? And thus the idea of, well, should we really be quarantining people that are healthy? Because you're healthy, because you are the farmer, because you are diversified, because you kissed your wife, and therefore you're not wearing a mask and you're not scared of having it and you have not gotten it. So therefore, should you be quarantined? No, I mean, you should be going back to farming because we need you as essential workers, right? So the farmers, in fact, because I work, my research center is in a huge area of farming. My farmers do a lot better with COVID when they catch it, if they catch it. And surprisingly, I've not seen that many farmers, and again, I have a lot of patients all around my clinic that are picking strawberries in the field and working in the ground. And I've not seen these people coming into my clinic for COVID. So something, is amazing that happens when you're in the ground. If you look at the studies of the schools that took, and as a teacher, the schools that took kids and put them in kindergarten to be in the garden, they had less ear infections than the kids that are staying in the classroom. Yeah. We live in these sterile environments. We have, air that is filtered. We have machines that are filtering our air, but we're not exposing ourselves and we're diminishing our bacteria, our microbes, right? Yeah. And so when we diminish, how are we going to survive? And like you, I work in my lab, my GI lab, and I have about 400 to probably close to 600 samples of stool with COVID, and we analyzed them. And, you know, I've been the guinea pig like you, and I basically have not worn a mask in my clinic because I want to build my immunity. I want to make sure, you know, that my immunity supports it. I learned something. The doctor who gave me all his research was the guy who started autism, the thought of autism fecal transplant, Dr. Sidney Feingold. Wow. He basically gave me all his books, all his patents when he passed away at 97 years old. And I told him, I said, you know, I really think you lived to 97 because you played with microbes. So that's why I was, you know, I was the girl that my mom would always like sterilize everything. And I would always get allergies because she kept me in such a sterile environment. And then I had to get myself to play with the dirt and to play with the mud and to play with the chicken poop and put it in my manure and all that, right? And so, you know, that built up my immunity. That stopped my allergies. That stopped my GI problems, right? That made me better, healthier. You know, the health, people are like, oh my God, you've got such good hair. I mean, it's no coincidence, right? Microbes are all around me. I want to be in that environment to build up my immunity because our bodies have the strength within them to build. That's why we were conceived with the ability. Think about it. The cure is within us. Stem cells, CAR T cells, microbiome, fecal transplant. The cure is within us. We as scientists and doctors have to start exploring what is in our body that allows us to live longer, to not have disease. Not, hi, give me a product that somebody's making $1 billion and that's supposed to be the answer to everything. That, to me, that's all, you know, and then, you know, that's just rubbish.
Yeah, there are no golden tickets in nature and therefore in medicine either.
Right.
It's almost like, as you said, like the people that are after this, you know, super clean, germ-free, super, you know, sterile environment, you know, as you look at hospitals and they have the most antibiotic resistant bugs there are on the planet. And
right, super bugs.
You know, where you see concentrations, higher concentrations of people that are having these, you know, gut related diseases that are in these, you know, cities, high concentrations of people.
Right.
It explains itself.
And we're creating superbugs. And my concern with this virus is we're creating a superbug. And you see it, various mutations, it keeps mutating. Yeah. Eventually, you know, more people are going to die. You know, it's going to be one vaccine after another. And really, we should just be building up our immunity, boosting our immunity, you know, all that. The number one thing, obesity, right? I mean, you know, so many things. So vitamin D. So vitamin D deficiency is a huge problem with COVID. So
everybody stays inside all day.
That's it.
Well, folks, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here because I think what we're going to do is we're going to have to do a part 2 down the road. This interview has been so helpful, Dr. Hazan. I thank you so much. The people that you're going to help in my listening audience and circle of influence. I'm excited to send you some samples and see what you find.
Yeah, so excited.
Yes.
I'll be writing it up.
Hang on the line for a second. I'll stop things down. People, if you could share this with your friends today, find somebody that you know would benefit from this information, share it with them, tell them about her book, her company, Progenibiome. And folks, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.